Dr. Dianna Terrell is an associate professor of education at St. Anselm College, where she teaches curriculum and assessment and education policy and supervises student teachers. Her research interests include civic, democratic, and socially just education, assessing outcomes of social science education, teacher education, and the impact of teacher evaluation systems. Her current research project, A Well-Informed Citizenry, explores social studies teachers' classroom practices in New Hampshire, as well as whether and how state policy informs those practices. And before she worked in higher ed, she was a high school social studies teacher in Connecticut. So we're very glad to have Dr. Terrell joining us again tonight, and I will turn it over to her.
Thanks, Tricia. I just want to acknowledge Diane Bianchetta and Diane W. I'm not the only Diana here tonight, which is really nice. So welcome everybody. Thank you, Tricia, and the New Hampshire Humanities to Go Online series for putting together this event with the support of the Mellon Foundation's National Civic Initiative, Why It Matters. The name of that initiative couldn't be more clear at this point. It obviously matters. So Tricia and I went back and forth a little bit before in the last couple of weeks about the title for the talk. I worried it might be too hyperbolic. At that point, it's like, oh, civic reckoning, you know. But I also thought, you know, if you told me in January 2020 that I'd be giving a talk a year from now on the civic reckoning that was 2020, I have to say I would not be surprised. So there may be, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. This might shift my where I'm talking to you a little bit, but I'm going to share my screencaster, my slides. There may be social studies teachers and other advocates for the social studies among us tonight who, like me, have been warning for 20 years that if you squeeze social studies out of the curriculum, and if you squeeze civics out of the curriculum, you're going to wind up with some kind of civic crisis. And so here we are. 2020 was a long time coming, actually. I put forward many assumptions and claims in the blurb for tonight's talk that what we're experiencing can be described as a meltdown and a reckoning, but also that there is something that we can learn from this, and more importantly, something that we can do to change our situation. So my plan tonight is to organize this talk in a way that a high quality social studies teacher would expect me to. So I'll organize the talk as a social inquiry. I'm a teacher educator or someone who teaches people how to teach. So I have to walk the talk, and that's what I plan to do. What this means, what a social inquiry is that I'll start by raising questions about social problems that are of authentic interest to me, or social problems that I have direct experience of and that I'm concerned about. I'll make claims about what's causing these problems and substantiate those claims with data, and I'll propose a plan of action. So it's as simple as that. And I'm going to lay out the questions here, and then I'll get to the polling thing, which it's a little bit of a technical feat that we're all about to accomplish. So the first question is this meltdown a civic reckoning? And here I will make the claim that this is a reckoning that is a long time coming. So yes, it's a meltdown, and yes, it's a reckoning. Second, what civic knowledge and skills must be durable? So I'll make the claim that essential civic knowledge and skills are really weakly defined in our nation, and that the knowledge that we're teaching is not really durable. And then finally, I'll ask what can be done to learn from this reckoning. So I'll make the claim then that educators really must outline what essential civic knowledge and skills are, and teach that knowledge and those skills in a way that leverages what we know about how people learn, which actually isn't a mystery. So my first question is this really a meltdown? And is this meltdown a civic reckoning? So after Wednesday, I suspect the assertion that our nation is experiencing a civic meltdown that is actually not just in 2020, but it's extended to 2021 at this point, is likely a point of bipartisan agreement. In other words, I don't think anyone would argue that a meltdown hasn't occurred. Oh, it looks like someone's using the whiteboard. Let's see if I can get that off. Oops. So Dana, I don't know if you know that, but you could use the whiteboard there. So I'm just going to leave that there. It's Dana's art. So before I get to examples of meltdown, I really want to make sure that we can participate in a poll to see what does this meltdown look like. Let's see. I'm going to use a platform called Poll Everywhere. So it really means poll from everywhere. If you would like to participate in a poll and watch the real-time results of the poll, you would just follow my instructions at this point. The first thing that you would do would be to grab a device, ideally one that you're not using to join our Zoom call. And I'm actually going to ask Tricia to put this information into the chat as well so that people can just kind of grab it from the chat and use it to put it into their browser. So once we get set up with this poll, once you get enrolled in the poll, you'll stay in the poll and you won't have to kind of come in and out. And we'll have 3 sets of questions and I'll walk you through it. So there's 2 ways that you can participate. One is by using text messaging, and the other one is just browsing right to the website, the Poll Everywhere website. So for text messaging, you would just pull out a phone that you text with and open a text message and text to 37607, and you put in to the comment, like you're sending a text, the comment would say Dianna G 376, and then you hit send. And you should get a message back from Poll Everywhere saying that you're enrolled in the poll. And the other way to respond would be on a website or a web browser. If you browse to pollev.com/Dianna G 376, you should be able to enroll in the poll there as well. You can respond with that browser using Safari, Firefox, or any one of those things. So the first question I'm going to ask is, and then we'll just see how people are doing in terms of their civic knowledge about how much civic engagement is happening in the United States, would be approximately what percentage of eligible Americans voted in the November 2020 general election. So I see that people are already responding, and this is something that's a little bit wonky about Poll Everywhere. Is I'm going to stop my share, and then I'm going to come on over to my iPad, share my iPad, so you can see people's real-time results. We'll give that a shot. And I'm wondering if that mark will still be on the slides when I come back, but I think we can all look past it. Okay. So right now you should be seeing the results. Tricia, are we good? Can you see them?
Yes, we can see them.
Good. All right. Good.
And
so congratulations, everybody, for participating in your, at least the first of this presentation, Poll Everywhere result. Approximately what percentage of Americans voted in November's general election? The answer is, and actually this, I'm not surprised that this audience has that kind of knowledge. The answer is C. That's the correct answer. And this is actually one of the highest turnouts that we've had in an election in many, many years. So, or many elections, I would say. I'm going to go back to sharing my desktop and my slides. Actually, you know what? Since we're here, let's do this. Let's keep going. Let's try it again. So I'm going to give you the instructions again for those of you who may have been like, well, I'll give it a shot, or right now they're just like with their phone going, oh, I don't know how to do this. We're going to go to the next polling exercise. So if you want to do this by text, again, those of you who have already texted, you're already enrolled in the poll. You don't have to re-enroll. You'll just stay in the same text set of text messages. For those of you who are on the web browser, you should see the activity switch. So we're going to do another question just to like kind of get you used to this sort of Poll Everywhere approach. This week in our nation's capital, some Americans, A, stormed and vandalized the Capitol building, B, launched a rocket from the Capitol steps, C, raised a Confederate flag in front of the Senate chambers, or D, both A and C. I'll tell you, I think what's happening now is people are like, oh yeah, A happened. Oh wait, B, C also happened. The only thing that didn't happen was B. So the correct answer is B. Partial credit though to those of you who put in A or C. You're paying attention to what's going on in American politics at this point. All right. So keep that, whatever device you're using to participate in this poll, keep it handy. We're going to do this 2 more times with other sets of questions. To keep people kind of involved. All right, and let me just get back to my screen share. All right, you should see my slides again. Okay, this is the second poll. Trisha, am I good? Thumbs up? Looks good. All right, just got thumbs up and unmuted. Thank you. All right, thanks so much. So if there's any question as to whether or not we're experiencing a civic meltdown, Wednesday's events laid those questions to rest. At this point, these images that are in the slideshow of an insurrectionist or insurrectionists storming the Capitol at the Congress as they were setting to confirm the results of the general election have been seen by one and all. I'm sure you've all seen these many images. Many of you, oh, by the way, many of these images are being used right now to bring some individuals, identify individuals and bring them in for questioning. So that's interesting. But who could forget this shirtless wannabe Viking? Evidently, it's not funny, I'm sorry. Evidently, he's known as the Q shaman, but let's not give him any more attention than he's already getting. So let's get back to the point. Now, following Wednesday's events, I have to acknowledge my concern here about striking the right tone in this presentation. I don't want to seem nonchalant or dismissive about what happened on Wednesday. This was absolutely an assault on our democratic traditions. But having said that, these events were hardly a surprise. By saying I'm not surprised, this isn't to suggest I'm unmoved by these events. It's simply to say that it's been a long time coming. And aside from the fact that Wednesday's insurrection was advertised and planned out in plain view over social media, similar themes of extremism and unrest and civic breakdown have really played out all year. So I've changed very little in my thinking about what's going wrong here and the role of public education in addressing the problem. After all, I did name this presentation the civic reckoning that was 2020, not the civic reckoning that was Wednesday, January 6th, which is actually hard for me to remember pre that. So providing a few more examples for 2020 and earlier about the civic reckoning. These are images obviously from spring 2020 and earlier, and the response from the National Guard back then. We also have images, of course, of Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and all of them are at the nation's capital. Several of these are at the nation's capital as well. A recent headline that really demonstrated to me the eroding trust in American elections is this one. And finally, one image that really strikes a little closer to home for me is this Bend, Oregon teacher who evidently had had enough of citizens protesting to reopen municipal services in Oregon. And she just, I don't know, you can Google this, really lost it at a traffic light to a bunch of protesters. The teacher was suspended by her district. I'm not sure of her current employment status, but it really struck a nerve with me. So not to be glib, but things are not great, and they haven't been great. A common element in these images is the degree to which one is willing or unwilling to engage with and navigate democratic systems when one feels an injustice has been committed. Distance from those we disagree with leads to distrust of those we don't understand, which leads to disgust. And these are sentiments that are replacing the necessary commitments in our democracy to association with those with whom we disagree, attention to their claims, deliberation over our disagreements, and to embracing the cognitive dissonance, which I'll get to in a little bit. These habits lead citizens to act through democratically accepted systems following norms of democratic engagement. Now, related to the question of whether or not this is a civic reckoning, I would also suggest that many social studies teachers and researchers have predicted this reckoning for decades. With the passage in 2002 of the No Child Left Behind Act, our nation's public schools turned their attention in a very singular fashion away from developing students' civic skills toward developing their reading and numeracy skills. And that led to a nearly instantaneous choking down of classroom time devoted to social studies. So in other words, with the passage of No Child Left Behind, public schools in America chose not to make time for teaching students how to engage productively in American social and civic life. So perhaps I'm telling you what every social studies and teacher and social studies researcher in America already knows. What happened in 2020 and what happened on Wednesday was a reckoning. There is nothing hyperbolic about it. So I hope you'll accept my premise here, since I've decided not to spend much more time laying out this case. I'd rather make the assumption that you agree with this premise and move on to questions about why this is happening and what we can do about it, which leads me to the next question of this inquiry. What does this civic reckoning highlight about the civic knowledge and skills that must be most durable to withstand America's most challenging times, or democracy's most challenging times? So nobody who's paid attention to how Americans are faring in terms of civic knowledge would be surprised to hear that civic knowledge has never really been very strong. We've used several measures to assess students' civic knowledge. And I'd like to engage the audience again here, so get yourself mentally prepared to see how well you'd fare on some of these assessments. I'm going to venture to guess you'll do quite well. So here I'll describe a bit about some of the headline-making assessments of civic knowledge, and then ask you to test your own knowledge on these same assessments. So first we have the National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP for short. You've probably heard of this before. This assessment is referred to as the nation's report card. It's been administered every few years to a representative sample of American school children and adolescents since the 1960s, since the mid-1960s. NAEP is called the nation's report card because it provides a longitudinal measure of how representative samples of American school children are doing in different disciplinary areas. And we can track growth or devolution of students' knowledge over time. History and civics are two of those disciplines that are tested. And NAEP assesses 8th graders in civics every few years. The most recent administration of the NAEP civics test was in 2018. So following that 2018 administration of the NAEP civics test, researchers found that only 24% of students assessed using this measure scored proficient or above. So not great, not great. I'm not laughing. A second assessment is the Annenberg Public Policy Center's Survey of Civic Knowledge. Many of you have heard about this, which has consistently found that American civic knowledge is declining and that only a quarter of Americans surveyed could name all 3 branches of government. And a third assessment, popular with education researchers like myself, is the IEA Civ Ed assessment, or known by its longer title, the International Association for the Evaluation of Education's Achievement in Civic Education. It's a little bit of a mouthful. Though this assessment did run in 2009 and 2016, and we expect a follow-up in 2022, the last time the United States participated in this was in 1999. So at this point, the data is quite old, and I would argue kind of irrelevant. A final assessment, which many of you have heard of, is the Citizenship and Naturalization Test. So this past year in the state of New Hampshire, Governor Sununu's Commissioner of Education, Frank Edelblu, issued a guidance document suggesting that the Citizenship Test was a high-quality assessment that could be used by local school districts in New Hampshire to assess students' civic knowledge. So we should be concerned for that reason as a state to hear that the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation recently found that only 1 in 3 Americans would be able to pass the citizenship test. By the way, passing here is defined as a 60% or a D-. So it's not really passing with flying colors, it's scraping by, just barely not failing. So we know Americans aren't doing a great job on these measures of civic knowledge. And I'd like to give you a go at 6 sample items from that citizenship test so we can see how you would fare. And then we can talk a little bit about what kinds of knowledge is being assessed and how to make that knowledge more durable. So for those of you who are already enrolled in the survey, you should be able to kind of continue to see that the survey is in action. I'm going to stop my share and share my iPad where the survey is live. Let's see. So the next 6 questions are going to be questions that are taken straight from that citizenship test. This is our last question. So let's go to the next question. The first question is, what do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? due process rights, Bill of Rights, fundamental rights, or primary rights? I'm watching the bottom right-hand corner of the screen where it's showing me total results. So the longer, it looks like at least 52 people are participating in the poll. Good for you. Okay, correct. We now know if we hadn't crowdsourced the answer, at least we all know that the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are called the Bill of Rights. Here's the second question. What are two rights in the Declaration of Independence? Good. So we know the correct answer actually is life and liberty. There's a couple of, it's hard to know which founding document, which really essential American document sometimes contains these principles. Life and liberty, of course, expands across in a couple of different places. So the answer is A. Here is the third question. We elect a US representative for how many years? Great. By the way, I want to tell people that you can change your answer if you want. If you're like, oh, actually, you can change your answer. This isn't like a history test in high school. You can actually change your answer. So the correct answer here is 2. I think for people that I would call it the distractor is C, 6 years. 4 years, obviously the administration of a president. So let's go to the next one. And what month do we vote for president? Good. Okay, I'm just going to move to the next one because recent past. What does the president's cabinet do? Advise the president, lead their departments, store the US laws, because it's a cabinet, get it? Both A and B. A is correct, they do that. B is correct, they do that. D is the most correct. They do both A and B. And I think one last question. This one is the tricky one. Oop, somebody's already there. Under our Constitution, that might have actually just been a carryover from the last poll. Under our Constitution, some powers belong to the federal government. Which of the following powers is not a power of the federal government? Tax, declare war, driver's license, print money. Good, driver's license. So I'm not really surprised that this crowd did a great job. This is the New Hampshire Humanities kind of. So I think that there's a lot of folks out here that have sort of a lot of knowledge headed into this. But let's try to kind of capture what's the point of this exercise. So I'm going to stop my share, go back to my keynote presentation. Give me just a second here. Thanks for your patience. Oh. Now I've got to flip through all of the slides that are static. I will tell you just before this, I was having some technical errors or technical difficulties with Poll Everywhere. I was back and forth with them and I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna take a picture. Well, I'll just use my iPad. Okay, so well done, everybody. Now you have a sense of the types of questions that Americans are failing to get right. But let's revisit now the assertions that I'm making about the connection between that knowledge that's being assessed and the civic reckoning that I'm arguing has taken place. Earlier, I made the claim that essential civic principles include association, attention, deliberation, dissonance, and action. At the same time, we now have a sense that some of the measures that we use to determine Americans' civic engagement, we've determined that they were lacking in basic civic knowledge. But a key question to ask ourselves, and the question that's been here all along, is does the knowledge that's being assessed on these measures reflect the core principles that must be most durable for our students? So let me put this another way. Would these concepts, like we've just taken a test on, distinguishing founding documents, the anatomy of the Constitution, terms of office, the timing of our elections, does that really help students navigate a world where this is the reality? So really take a moment to think about this question. Does this knowledge reflect what students need to know to face this democratic reality? So I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I can kind of imagine what you might be thinking. I imagine folks out there probably think to themselves, well, it's a start. That's something. That's at least something. Others may be thinking, yes, absolutely. American school age children need to know these things that I've just been tested on. They need to know these facts. But I'm here to tell you tonight that I really think that we can do a lot better on this. We need to start with what makes knowledge durable. I want to make the case that Americans are not remembering their civics, not because they weren't taught it, but because they didn't learn it well, and now they don't remember it. Teaching isn't talking, listening isn't learning. So to my mind, this shortcoming of education is sort of ludicrous. I mean, it's not like we don't know how people learn. In fact, there's an entire field of research committed to how people learn. One of my favorite books about this, which I assign every term in my class, is called How People Learn. So there's a lot of information on this. And I will say, though, in many cases, this is not as true in New Hampshire. We don't teach students the ways we know that people learn. So I want to walk you through an example of what I mean, and this will be our last adventure with Poll Everywhere, and then we can kind of put it down. But if you're someone in the audience who's been a student, by the way, in my curriculum class, you've done this activity before, so I'm going to apologize now. You can participate or not, but this won't surprise you. So get your tablet or phone ready for this final activity. I'm going to ask you to engage here again. So what we're going to do is this. I'm going to show you a list of names associated with actions. So I'll read them all to you aloud once, and I'll let you study the material for 20 seconds or so. And then following that, we're going to assess your retrieval, your memory of these data points. And I'll launch Poll Everywhere to do the same thing, test those memories on those facts. Okay, so here we're going to go. Names with associated actions. John walked on the roof. Bill picked up the egg. Pete hid the axe. Jim flew the kite. Frank flipped the switch. Alfred built a boat. Sam hit his head on the ceiling. Adam quit his job. And Jay fixed the sail. Ted wrote the play. 10 names with actions. I'll wait for a full 20 seconds. I'm gonna go look at my clock and lose track of time. I'm really enjoying, I get this like second to, while you're studying these names, I'm looking through the chat. It's really wonderful to see you all so engaged in this. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share. We're gonna go back to Poll Everywhere. So it's the same number if you're in using, what am I saying? Text messaging or online, whatever is your preference. So I'm going to share my iPad and we'll go and test your knowledge, see how well you can retrieve these factoids. And there's my last question. So we're activating this next question. And your answer should be the letter that's next to the name. So which of these 10 folks built the boat? Could have been Pete, Jim, Frank, Alfred, Sam, Adam, or Jay. The correct answer, though, let me see if it's showing. Yeah, Alfred. Well done. All right. So we're going to go to the next one. Test your retrieval. Who flipped the switch? Alfred. He's been very busy. I'm just kidding. That was probably from the last poll. Frank flipped the switch. Like there's some guesses about other people. Could have been Bill, Pete, Jim, Frank, Alfred, Sam, or Jay. The correct answer is Frank. So we'll get to why I'm not surprised that you can remember that. Okay. And then who flew the kite? There's a little bit of a peer effect here. It's like, oh, everybody said Jim, right? Okay, so the correct answer is Jim. Let's go to the next one. Who wrote the play? Pretty good. All right. So this correct answer, you guys are doing pretty well. I mean, like the preponderance of the audience is getting the correct answers. So we're going to stop with that one. I think that that's the last one. I think I just did 5. We're not going to do all 10 of them because that could really take up all of our time. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to go back again to our keynote presentation. Give me 1 second. I do one more activity related to that. Okay. So I'm just going to actually, the only thing, we're going to try this again. Let me just, let's see. Hang on. Let me try to get the right stuff here. Okay. So well done. I'm going to toggle through these slides. Give me a hot second here. I'm a teacher, so I'm worried that the technology is not going to work. And so I have like a backup plan and a backup plan for my backup plan and another backup plan. And so that's what I have to toggle through here. So well done, New Hampshire Humanities crowd. I'll be totally honest with you. If I were in the crowd tonight, I would probably not have even bothered engaging in this exercise. So for someone with a master's in history, I have a really pretty lousy memory. My sister would disagree. But let us not forget the key point here. Remember, we're working on establishing what makes knowledge durable, what makes something memorable, what makes it easy for you to retrieve that information. So for folks who are successful at exercises like these, they usually have a memorization strategy. So some people will picture someone with the same name doing that action. Some people will build memory castles. Some people will make up mnemonic devices. So for example, you might have all remembered that Frank flipped the switch because both the name and the action start with an F. But I want to lay out a few caveats here. The first is that we can't assume that all American school children have these tricks, tools, and strategies. The second is that retrieving information is not thinking it really deeply, it's retrieving. And the third is that this is meaningless information. This is not the type of knowledge that we want to make durable for our students. We want that knowledge to be much more deeper in terms of meaning. So there's an easier way to make information more durable, especially when it's more important information. And I want to show you what I mean by going through our final Poll Everywhere activity with a different set of names, same activity, but a different set of names and actions. The directions are the same. I'm going to show you and read you a set of names and actions. I'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to memorize, and then we'll take the Poll Everywhere poll again and see if you improve. So here we go. Santa walked on the roof. The Easter Bunny picked up the egg. George Washington hid the axe. Ben Franklin flew the kite. Thomas Edison flipped the switch. Noah built a boat. Michael Jordan hit his head on the ceiling. Richard Nixon quit his job. Christopher Columbus fixed the sail, and William Shakespeare wrote the play. Do I need to give you 20 seconds? I'm going to stop the share and head back over to Poll Everywhere. So stay in your poll. Give me 1 sec. I hope this toggling back and forth is not irritating people. Please be patient with me. Okay. All right, on to the next question. So this is take 2. Oh, we didn't do who picked up the egg. We'll go to take 2. Who walked on the roof? Oop, the Easter Bunny walked on the roof. Nope. I think that's probably, like I said, from the last poll. Okay, so Santa walked on the roof. Who quit his job? We know Santa didn't quit his job, so this is just like a lag time thing. Santa's busy. I see Derek's in the chat with some teaching strategies. Take 2, who fixed the sail? Christopher Columbus, Noah, Richard Nixon, no. Okay, Let's go to the next one. Who hid the axe? I don't know if anyone's gonna, people are getting the hang of the pull everywhere. Who hit his head on the ceiling? Yes. George Washington was quite tall from what I understand. Yeah. All right, we're back to our last poll. So, all right, I want you to take just 5 seconds here and be thinking about, I didn't change the actions. I just changed the names. I didn't change the content too much, just change the names. So what's happening here? Just take 5 seconds to kind of like really reflect on what's going on. My slides. You can see them, Trisha? Looking for a thumbs up, Trisha. Yeah, great. Again, toggle through the slides. I'm going to blame pull everywhere for this. Okay. So I think it's fair to say that people did better the second time, that there was a lot less sort of distribution of students of participants' answers across the different options. So like I said, the only content I changed was the name, and it was obviously a lot easier. So some of you may be thinking, well, the name gives you a hint to the action, right? And I'm going to say, yes, that's true to a certain extent. That's true. But there's more to this demonstration in terms of the things that we can leverage in students' minds to make knowledge more durable or to make new learning stick. So here are just a few things that we know about which enable students to learn in durable ways. The example that we just went through illustrates most of these concepts, but I think it best illustrates the concept of prior knowledge and conceptual framing. When we have an experience of something over and over and we build that concept up in our mind, the concept becomes durable by being attached in our mind and connected to many different visuals, thoughts, smells, experiences. In other words, the memory is durable because we have lots of different avenues by which we can retrieve it. And the more a memory is stored and retrieved, the more it becomes durable. And this is a massive oversimplification, but I like to think of it as akin to making a path through the woods or cutting a path through thick woods. The more you walk the path, the clearer the path becomes, and the easier it is to retrace your steps back and forth. Something that really merits highlighting here, though, is that I will tell you as I get older, and the student population I work with stays the same age, this is just like one of those mind-bending things about teaching. I get older, students same age, but they're born later and later. So some of these concepts become less likely to activate prior knowledge, and some of these concepts become conceptually confused. So guess which names, as I've run this activity in my classroom over the last several, I don't know, probably nearly a decade at this point, guess which names have become fuzzy? These two. This is because as time goes by, these names and associations to those names become more and more diffuse, and students don't really know. Maybe Michael Jordan's not, I mean, like, yeah, okay, he's a legend. You know, I'm not a sports person. I think he's a legend. I think I've heard of him. Like, I know him. But as he gets, you know, as time goes by, fewer and fewer people have heard of him. Richard Nixon, yeah, his history. So students get these two names also confused, and understandably so, because they're both to do with boats. The folks in this audience also got the Noah and Christopher Columbus one confused as well. So what is this highlighting, though, about what we know about durable knowledge? I mean, what we really need to do is first think about what would this task look like if I was not steeped in American historical lore, George Washington with the axe, the Christian tradition, Western holidays, canonical authors like William Shakespeare, or sports. So this highlights the fact that your ability to store and retrieve information is culturally situated. So that's to say that you have funds of knowledge related to your cultures and your traditions, your prior knowledge, that can be leveraged by your teachers to make your learning more durable. Okay, so that's related to conceptual frames and prior knowledge. Two other concepts I'd like to highlight here pretty briefly are that authentic applications and cognitive dissonance and productive struggle, the last two of which I'll take together. So I'll start with authentic applications. I need to move pretty quickly through it because I'm seeing I'm running out of time. I did practice this, and it was 45 minutes, but I had no idea how long Pull Everywhere would take. So I want you to imagine that you were a 13-year-old American. You can imagine yourself as a 13-year-old, that you were a 13-year-old or a 13-year-old you know. For the teachers here, the thought experiment shouldn't pose too much of a challenge, but I want you to imagine that you're 13 and you're trying to memorize the correct answers to these questions. Now, some of these are questions you should recognize at this point. They're all from the Citizenship Test. And what's the problem? So you're a 13-year-old and I'm a high school social studies teacher, and I'm telling you that Americans want you to know this stuff on command because it's important for like democracy and everything. And you're going to tell me which short pier I should take a long walk off of because none of these things have any relevance or meaning in your life. And before I start faulting you as a high school history teacher for the fact that you couldn't care less, I'm going to remember that this morning we did an active shooter drill. Next week, you'll be fully remote because of a global pandemic. And just this past Wednesday, you saw a bunch of so-called adults acting like a bunch of buffoons, and they evidently got away with it. So seriously, how can I argue with you, 13-year-old? Relative to other stuff going on in your life, knowing what the president's cabinet does is like not, the connection's kind of vague. So what you really want to know is things that are connected to your life. So maybe you might want to ask questions like, did the framers envision your need to practice active shooter drills when they drafted the Second Amendment? That might be a good question to raise. I'm not taking a position on it. It just might be a good question to raise. Or how come this guy gets to walk into the nation's capital with a gun, but this boy, Tamir Rice, who is also 13-year-old, he's also your age, can't play on his front lawn safely? Which knowledge is more of an authentic application of civic principles for a 13-year-old? So this is something that we know will help knowledge be more durable, is to take up some of those issues that are authentic applications to students' lives. So I'm just raising the point, similar to conceptual frames and prior knowledge, whatever we do to determine to be essential knowledge and skills must also have some connection to students' actual lives or authentic applications. So the final construct, and I'll go through this pretty quickly again, is productive struggle and cognitive dissonance. So recall I said I was not surprised at all in terms of what happened Wednesday. In fact, the only thing I was really surprised by was the Capitol Police, but we don't have to talk about that right now. I will say this has been brewing for some time. Part of this event reflects that some individuals are operating from a different set of lived experiences and even, I would say, a different reality. We do not hold in common basic epistemic commitments, like what is true, what are facts. And extremism, like we saw on Wednesday, comes from a total conviction that what one is experiencing as a reality, other people are not privy to. It's like it's too much, it's too disjointed, and there's too much dissonance for someone to believe that they're surrounded by people who all agree with them, yet the country appears to be moving in a totally different direction. So part of my project as an educator is to get my students comfortable with dissonance. It is not a good feeling. Usually when you feel it, you're on the verge of something new. By and large, dissonance should be embraced. So what is it? Perhaps my favorite example of what dissonance is comes from this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon from June 17th, 1990. And for those of you who know me, actually, I have this actual cartoon hanging in the wall on my office at St. Anselm. It's been on my wall since I cut it out of the Boston Globe when I was in 8th grade, over probably 30 years ago. So just in a nutshell, this is the one where Calvin goes neo-Cubist. And he says it all started when his father and he got into a debate about how his father and he got into a debate. Now he's cursed by seeing multiple perspectives and dimensions. In the end, everything returns to normal for Calvin. But I'm willing to bet over the course of time, Calvin's father, like my own father, who is in the audience tonight, I think, had significant long-term impact on Calvin's capacity to engage in thought experiments and to entertain competing perspectives. So what does this have to do with durable knowledge? Like Calvin is experiencing in this strip, the sensation of recognizing perspectives other than one's own is very uncomfortable. It's scary, it's destabilizing. Some researchers in education research call this equilibrium and wobble. People don't like this feeling. They do what they can to avoid it, but I'll argue to you that it's the job of social studies teachers and educators more generally to deliberately provoke these moments of cognitive dissonance for our students. So it's precisely that discomfort and total unwillingness to accept this discomfort or a reality that doesn't jive with one's own that leads to this type of display. So research that's coming from ed psychology, developmental psychology, cognitive psychology suggests that the brain is very efficient at disregarding and deleting information that doesn't reflect one's own reality. It's truly through the act of engaging with diverse experiences, associating and deliberating with those with whom you don't share their perspective, embracing moments of dissonance that lead people to generate durable learning. So psychologists call this productive struggle. Along the same lines, we know that those who investigate and reflect on their failures, explore disjunctures, they are ones that actually embrace durable learning. What does this mean for civic education? In a nutshell, it means that this information on the left, while a very important information, is doomed to be forgotten over time unless it meets criteria for durable knowledge. Durable knowledge must reflect students' authentic lived experiences. They should be encouraged to dive into moments where they literally have to struggle mentally to make greater sense of a concept. If you want proof of this, I'm going to ask you a very quick question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask in a setting like this. What single person or event was most instrumental in shaping your civic identity? And I'd like you to bring that person or event to mind. And I'm willing to suggest that it's probably quite easy. In fact, I'm willing to bet that you've brought that person or event to mind over and over and over and over and over in different discussions during different reflections. I'm willing to bet that this person or event is a source of productive struggle for you. So you should thank that person in your heart because while we're at it, since they've done a really good job. So thanks, Mark Terrell. Luckily, this is where education research and best practices in the social studies classroom overlap with one another. So let's return to those final questions before we wrap things up, which I can do very quickly. I know people want to ask questions. Is this meltdown a civic reckoning? We addressed that. I've also made the case for the types of knowledge and skills that must be durable and what makes knowledge durable. And so now the question is, what can be learned? And I'll just end with this final kind of thought. Speaker of the House on January 6th, Nancy Pelosi spoke about the fact that it was the Feast of the Epiphany. And she said, on this day of elation, let us pray that this instigation to violence will provide an epiphany for our country to heal. And she recited the prayer of St. Francis. And President-elect Joe Biden also echoed her hope yesterday. He said, our democratic institutions are not relics of another age. They're what set this nation apart. They're the guardrails of democracy. There is nothing less at stake than who we are as a nation, what we stand for, what we believe, what we will be. The original spirit must again guide and animate our work. Okay. So a lot can be said about us as a nation and as a democracy, not just in terms of how we handle these types of conflicts when they happen, but what we learn from them as a result and the actions that we need to do, to undertake, to remediate the wrongdoing. And I'm willing to admit here, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna. It's true, I'm very optimistic. These are my rose-colored glasses. But I'd like to make a few, I really do think that we can do better. So I'd like to just make a few final points. One is that we really do have weak conceptualizations about what essential civic knowledge and skills should be. Those things that form the bedrock of our social studies curricular initiatives in New Hampshire. The standards guiding civics and social studies in New Hampshire were adopted in 2006. And though that doesn't sound like that long ago, this is well before students started bringing cell phones to school. So like the title of the book from my colleague, Dr. Sam Weinberg, why learn history when it's on your phone? So it really has led us to question what are essential knowledge and skills. So a second point I'd like to raise is that even despite the very weak curricular and education policy direction in New Hampshire public schools, New Hampshire social studies teachers are outliers in the quality of work that they're doing in their classrooms in New Hampshire. So I've recently conducted a study of New Hampshire's pedagogical approaches to teaching the social studies and found that there are really quite a lot of there are a lot of really high leverage practices happening in social studies classrooms. I like to say that civic education is in the water here, but actually to a large extent, teachers are carrying that mantle. And then finally, in terms of being an outlier status, we don't have to in New Hampshire just meet the minimum bar. In fact, we're really in a unique position where as a state, we might set out to tackle the most entrenched problem in social studies and civics, which is the civic opportunity gap. So findings from our study mirror what's happening nationwide. Low-income students, students of color can often attend schools where they don't have the same access to high-quality social studies instruction as their primary white, middle, and upper class peers in neighboring districts. So this is to say that New Hampshire is in a unique position to demand that all of our state students, no matter their zip code, enjoy equal access to high-quality education that we know empirically is more likely to make them civically engaged from their youth all the way into their adulthood. So that's it, folks. I know I kind of ran a little longer than I intended to, but thank you for your patience while I worked through the pull everywhere situation. And I really appreciate your contributions and ready to turn it back over to you, Tricia.
Okay, we've had some questions in the chat. There was also a lot of conversation going on between people in the chat. So if you have a question that you still want answered, would you, as I scroll through and look at some of these questions, could you retype it into the chat if you have a question? I'm just going to ask the last question that came up because I think it was to your last point, Dianna. Peter asked, could that be because parents are usually more actively engaged in civic activities? So I think that was on your last point about New Hampshire being an outlier.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question? I just noticed Judith at 5:05 said, please talk slower. Sorry, Judith. I definitely didn't. I sped up. Sorry, Tricia, go ahead.
That's okay. So Peter was asking, I think this was on your last point about New Hampshire being an outlier. Peter asked,
yes,
could it be because parents are more actively engaged in civic activities here?
Yeah, it's exactly. There's a lot of demographic features of New Hampshire's electorate, of New Hampshire's population of parents that lead it to become a more civically engaged state. Parental schooling and formal education is actually one of those the fact that most people in New Hampshire speak English as a first language. Parents are also obviously very much engaged. So we do in New Hampshire have one of the highest rates of participation of any state. That shouldn't surprise really anybody because we're kind of sitting right in, the first primary in the nation kind of thing. So there's a lot of kind of real direct experience of democratic systems that lead people to be engaged in those things. So yes, Pete, that's correct.
Lots of questions and lots of compliments to you, Dianna, on a great program and a fantastic presentation. I'm seeing a lot of those in the comments. So Derek has made the point. He says it's significant that many middle and high schools don't teach the Reconstruction era, which is when the KKK rose up from the ashes of the Civil War and formed lynch mobs. Can you comment on that, on what the curriculum is for the period right after the Civil War and Reconstruction?
I will say, so I'm just going to speak to New Hampshire because I think people understand that public education is a state project. So we had that question on federalism and, state curriculum is developed at the state level. That's what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So in New Hampshire, we take very seriously the live free or die idea. And we don't have a lot of state unison or, we do have our standards from 2006 that say these are the kinds of things that we should be teaching in New Hampshire schools, but largely it's a local control project. Mm-hmm. So those things are decided at district levels by district boards of education. So in terms of what's being taught related to Reconstruction era American history, and I agree with you, I think it's an exceeding, especially timely right now. It varies classroom to classroom, I would say.
Yeah, I used to teach at the college level for about a decade, and I can tell you that teaching early U.S. history and modern U.S. history, those survey courses for students are always separated at, it's usually at 18
Reconstruction
or 1877. So,
antebellum, postbellum.
You may or may not get that in college.
Right.
Lucille asks how to teach students to recognize misinformation and false information.
Oh, Lucille, this goes right to like the heart of that shared, like the epistemic commitments. It's like, how do you convince somebody that something is actually a worthwhile fact to embrace? I think that media literacy is a critical part of civic education. We have to be able to teach American youth, Granite State youth, about how to parse different sources of media and to look for signals of misinformation and that kind of thing. I honestly think that what it really takes is a social studies teacher to say, here are different sources of information, and to really kind of systematically over the course of a year introduce students to the different types of rhetoric and techniques that different sources of propaganda use versus sources that have data that most people who have formal training understand to be real and true. So good question, Lucille. I'm not really sure how, but I do think it's an essential priority that you're touching on.
We've got a comment or a question from Elizabeth DeBrule from the New Hampshire Historical Society. I'm going to read her question, but I also want to shout out to Elizabeth for putting in the chat earlier the New Hampshire Historical Society's 4th grade curriculum, Moose on the Loose. So you can check that out. We'll put that in the chat again in just a second for social studies teachers. So Elizabeth asks, I've read that teaching kids empathy is one of the most important civic soft skills. That's a pretty squishy topic. How can teachers tackle that?
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I agree with this assertion, Elizabeth, and I don't think Elizabeth would be surprised to hear that I agree with that. Empathy really is, it goes right to the heart of that point I was making about cognitive dissonance. So understanding that other people have different perspectives from you, that they don't share the same commitments that you have, that they don't look at the same sources of information, that they don't have, parents or whatever that voted the same way as your parents. Like, so I would say that that's empathy, but I would also say that that's just exposure to diverse worldviews and perspectives about what are the commitments that are most important in the United States. So it's a soft skill. How do you teach it? I think she said it was a little squishy. I can practically hear Elizabeth saying that. Again, it's one of those things that doesn't happen in one classroom, in 1 week, in one lesson plan. It happens over the course of instruction from, kindergarten through high school. So it has to actually be an intention of the policy leaders and standard developers to kind of move that, to highlight that as part of the curriculum. It's not about feeling for your fellow citizens and feeling their feelings in your heart. It's about understanding that it's not all about me. Like, other people think different things.
That's a great point. So Jennifer says, Dianna is someone who sees value in experiential learning. How much of the fact-driven civics education is due to teaching to prepare students for testing?
Oh, Jennifer. Well, so I'm with you on the experiential learning. What we know about how students learn is that they have to activate their prior knowledge. They have to be able to see authentic applications. They also have to experience the reality of whatever is happening. This is part of the reason why, like when I say I'm trying to walk the talk as a teacher educator, you have to experience the pull. Like, what would it be like to be a 13-year-old or somebody who's coming to the United States and taking the citizenship? You have to kind of experience things in order to kind of understand what it would feel like. So absolutely, there's a lot of research to bear out the fact that experience is really key. Now, in terms of fact-driven testing, that kind of thing, again, because we're in New Hampshire and everything is sort of locally developed, it's like one person's citizenship test in one district is totally different from others. So some districts use that citizenship test. Other districts use one example of a really cool assessment I saw was I'm such a geek. I saw a really cool assessment, everybody. It was for students to make up their own 28th Amendment to the Constitution, and sort of to set it up, like, how can I get this 28th Amendment, this proposed 28th Amendment ratified or approved. So we don't actually have set fact-based tests like the citizenship test, unless you're in a district where they use the citizenship test. Part of the reason why social studies has been totally squeezed out is because we don't have high stakes tests in social studies. Students take tests at the end of the spring, usually in New Hampshire, on literacy, reading and writing, and on math. And social studies is not part of that. So there's no real tail wagging the dog making civics be a really high priority in schools. But tests do drive the curriculum. All right, I feel like I'm giving you very long answers today.
No, they're great answers.
Hear them.
These are great questions and great answers. So Frank says, Frank asks, although civic knowledge is important, how important is the belief in core values such as honesty, equal rights, etc.?
The values education is a really touchy subject in civics. So I would say, so I'm just going to take honest, I'm going to go kind of straight to just those two examples, honesty and equal rights. So I don't think that you have to explain to American teenage students about justice and equality. They have like a really keen, I don't know, attention for when things are unjust. I think if anybody knows any teenagers, you probably know that's true. So teaching students to care about honesty and equal rights is not something I think educators really have to do. They care about those things. Teaching students to act in ways that reflect those ethical commitments, and to understand that there's very different ways to show honesty. There's very different ways to try to aspire toward equal rights or advocate for equal rights. There's, depending on your partisan affiliation, there's very different actions you can take. So I don't think we have to teach kids to be honest and to care about equal rights. I think we need to help them develop the skills that are most aligned with their ways of acting, their ways of thinking, to understand that there's lots of different ways to address those issues.
We'll take a few more questions. I think everyone who's staying on wants to hear, wants the answers. So we'll keep going for a little bit longer. So the next question comes
I'll try to talk slower.
So the next question comes from one of my favorite educators, my colleague, Mary Nolan, who's our Connections Literacy Program manager at New Hampshire Humanities. And Mary also was a social studies teacher. So Mary says, Dianna, how would you combat belief polarization in students, which are at all-time high levels for civics and social studies teachers?
Polarization. I guess just that. I mean, I think so. I really am a geek. I pulled out before our presentation tonight. I have, and it's somewhere around here, Alexis de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America, and the Federalist Papers. There really are some gems in there, but one of the biggest concepts that comes across in both of those texts is this idea of association, that you have to be close to, or you have to have personal experience. This goes actually back to Jennifer's point on experiential learning. You have to be close to people and to care about people who think very different from you and have very different beliefs, to develop the tolerance and the patience for hearing people out and for believing that their reality, their experience might be very different from yours, and you should sort of listen. So I think that all forms of polarization and extremism are sort of mediated by knowing and caring about somebody who believes very different from you and wanting to be patient with them to understand where they're coming from.
A few more questions.
I had the answer.
I know it's a tough question. And there's some comments in the chat too with some suggestions. I think, and I also want to give a shout out to Martha Madsen in the chat and NewHampshireCivics.org, which also has resources and lesson plans for teachers. So nhcivics.org. Let's see. It's a comment, not a question. I see there's a lot of good comments. I want to engage with all of them, but I want to try to get to the last questions first.
I see there's 11 pages of different, but I'm not going to scroll through. It'll just make me feel really.
Okay, so I see a question here from James McKim. James asks, wanting to care about and engage with those who believe differently is about the growth mindset. How do you get people to have growth mindset?
Yeah, James is talking about the work of Carol Dweck, who's written this book called Mindset. It's about kind of embracing the fact that you can grow your intelligence, you can change your personality, and that students who know that they can grow their intelligence tend to persevere at higher rates through hardship and through challenging times. So yeah, no, how do you do a growth mindset, James? I think the best thing to do, which I do in my class, is just to kind of to introduce students. So I teach people who are going to be teachers to Carol Dweck's research and say, there's a lot of research out there that says your intelligence is not fixed. Your personality is not fixed. You can grow these things, and sort of letting students understand that there is very real evidence to suggest that they don't have to be who they are in this very moment. I always give them an example too. I always say, I completely changed I grew my own personality. I went abroad. This is actually my husband and I were talking about going abroad. I think is probably one of the most important things that people can do to understand that they're not the center of the universe. But I was on the train to go abroad, and I decided I was just going to be a different person. And if you had told me before I went abroad, that I would be presenting to an audience the size, even over Zoom, I'd be like, you're crazy. That would never have happened. But I decided to change my personality. James, I'm on a tangent, but I don't know did I address his question? Sort of.
I think no, these were all great answers, and there's a lot of great comments in the chat and suggestions too from teachers I'm seeing. So we have recorded tonight's conversation, and when we post the link to the video on our website, you'll be able to find the chat info too. So we'll send that out so people can have that information. I want to thank Professor Terrell for joining us tonight and for giving us such an interactive and wonderful presentation and so much to think about. So this program tonight was part of the Why It Matters initiative, which is sponsored by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and we thank them for their support. New Hampshire Humanities is funded in large part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And if you would like to support our work, you can visit nhhumanities.org/give. While you're on our website, you can sign up for our Human Ties e-news, which we send out every 2 weeks and tells you about upcoming programs. And after tonight's program, you'll receive a survey, which will not look nearly as cool as the poll everywhere. It's not quite as pretty, but it'll do the job. We'll ask you some questions about tonight's program, and we appreciate your feedback, and we hope you'll join us for upcoming programs. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much to Dianna, and have a good night. Thank you.
Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. Thank you.